What exactly is software as a medical device? Our guest today, Neha Gupta, works extensively in this space and will share with us what software as a medical device exactly is, why it's important for companies to develop capabilities now, and how these solutions will become a significant part of many company portfolios in the years ahead. Thank you again for joining us for another Insights video with myself, Harsha Kubvat, Head of Strategic Consulting at INOVIS. And today we're going to be talking about software as a medical device. And joining us today is Neha Gupta. Neha, thank you so much for joining us on today's call.
Hi, Harshal. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And it's my pleasure. Looking forward to talking about software as a medical device, or SAMD, as we end up calling it.
SAMD. Okay, well, let's use that algorithm. I think maybe before we get started, just remind everyone that this is a recorded conversation. It's going to be quite loose and fluid. We've got a few topics that we planned in advance, but obviously we'll just see how the conversation takes us. And I think before we get started into that in-depth conversation, it'd be nice for the viewers and audience to hear a little bit about you. How have you ended up working in this digital space, Neha?
Absolutely, and I love the way that you put it. Ended up, which is sort of the theme of how I am here today. So I started in the healthcare space as a healthcare provider, where I was working as a periodontist and implant dentist for almost 5 years. And during this time, I wrote a research proposal around how we could use technology to improve patient outcomes. And this was my first attempt to actually bring in technology into my healthcare practice. And that led me to designing this program with University of Hong Kong through a scholarship. And I really enjoyed working in this intersection of healthcare and technology. I've been there for almost 7 years now. And that also means I've not touched a patient in the last 7 years, and God forbid if I have to today. But in these 7 years, I came to Oxford, completed my MBA, worked in a venture capital space, looking at digital health investments, and was then part of a remote patient monitoring startup based out of London in my initial years of post-MBA. Mm-hmm. Finally, ended up joining Ipsen as their digital product lead in the neuroscience faculty. So that's a very short summary of how I've ended up here.
Yeah, and the word ended up, I think the same applies to many people that work in competitive intelligence and strategic consulting space like me. I mean, competitive intelligence is something that's evolving, growing, and I don't think I went to school thinking this is what I'm going to do. But hey, here I am, and see where the journey takes me and takes us. Part of that journey today is about talking about this SAMD, software as a medical device. Can you tell us what that is in the simplest terms?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we were to just look at the words software as a medical device, I think that in itself tells you that it's a software application that is being used as a medical device. So while software is still a well circumscribed word, medical device is where things become loose and there is a wider landscape against which this medical device could reside in. So software as a medical device could be as simple as a digital thermometer, or it could be as complicated and life critical, such as a pacemaker with a digital application on top of it.
Right.
So both of those spectrum would essentially be SAMD. They would be classified under different classification spaces, the risk that they are introducing into the existing treatment pathways. But the overall umbrella would still be software as a medical device.
Your role right now, you said you're working at Ipsen in this space. What is it that you're doing day to day in this space?
So my role essentially is more around creating digital solutions, digital applications around the needs of the business. And because Ipsen is a specialty care pharmaceuticals, I have limited needs against which I am tasked to bring these digital applications into light. Mm-hmm. But in bringing it back to the SAMD side, I think the software as a medical device is a paradigm which is impossible to not interact with when you're in digital health industry and when you're based out of Europe. Because the new regulations which have come in from the end of May, the medical device regulations now essentially reclassified all the digital applications, making the digital applications which were not even a class 1 before class 1, and those which were class 1 into class 2A or class 2B.
Right.
So if you're building digital health applications in targeting Europe and European users, EU and even UK, then SAMD is part of is the daily bread and butter. So essentially you will have to familiarize yourself with the requirements. You will have to familiarize yourself with the risk management controls, with the design controls, the need for the newer MDR requirements.
Right.
And this journey for me began in my first role, which was part of a startup as a remote patient monitoring solution. And it was in this where we were first trying to classify this as a class 1 medical device, which also involved building the QMS and the quality practices and the compliance that allowed you to build a software
Right.
that met the certain ISO standards that were part of the ISO standards. Most commonly are the 13485 for the QMS. Then you have the software development ISO standard. So keeping those in mind, familiarizing yourself began there. And now, as I'm part of a pharmaceutical company, we have much more guidelines and compliance requirements that we have to adhere to. And that means that we also now work very closely with dedicated regulatory resources and regulatory experts. However, that also translate into you understanding the basic requirement from a product perspective and translating them to your engineering team and the development team.
Right. Right. And I suppose, coming from the life sciences pharmaceutical industry, we're very aware of regulatory aspects at all levels. And I suppose digital software is no stranger, or will become no stranger to that, and will have to conform and follow the guidelines that are set. If we take this step back and think about software as a medical device, as you explain, software does something medically, and we take your hat now in a pharmaceutical space, in a company such as Ipsen or any other specialty company. I suppose there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation in terms of having a product and then putting something digital on top of it, supporting an existing traditional therapeutic, whether that's a biologic, small molecule, whatever we want to talk about, or on the other hand, not needing that and actually just having a software that helps support a certain space without applying or administering a drug alongside it. Is that a good way of thinking about kind of bucketing or compartmentalizing software as a medical device? Are they these kind of standalone pillars, or is it very fluid and mixed in your opinion?
So I think that's a very pragmatic way of classifying the software applications in the digital world space. And from my experience, most of the established healthcare stakeholders, that would be your pharmaceutical companies, your medical device companies, they already have established presence, and that entails a suite of drugs or products or medical devices which are not digital. So the digital applications in this small ecosystem are more around companion applications, are more around addendums to already existing non-digital applications. However, if you look in the startup ecosystem, where the applications are purely being built from scratch,
right,
and not as built or as an addendum to something that already exists. That's where you have applications such as remote patient monitoring solution, which is purely a digital application, is targeted towards connecting the healthcare professionals to their patients outside of the health setting. It is independent of the medicines. It is independent of the medical device that was used. It is independent of any physical healthcare product.
Yeah, or intervention, right?
Or intervention, exactly. Now, we could tailor remote patient monitoring to a particular disease segment, for instance, chronic heart failure, for instance, maybe elective surgical procedures, for instance, maybe cirrhosis. You could target your remote monitoring to a particular disease segment, and that would mean, building on that example, suppose we are building a remote patient monitoring solution for chronic heart failure.
Yeah.
Now, that would require that these patients' vitals around blood pressure, weight would be monitored. And that's when you then integrate with real physical devices so that these data points are connected on a real-time basis. And that's where you start overlapping with existing established healthcare providers. And your application now is also a bit of a companion application to existing healthcare products.
Right.
There is a bit of an overlap between both those definitions. And I would say, as it is with digital, it's a very fluid scape where it's difficult to delineate the application basis its use, because as the adoption grows, there is iteration, and then there is development that happens, and
Right.
and the product evolves from being just one. Yeah, it evolves to actually encompassing more use cases.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a really good point in terms of when we traditionally think about pharmaceutical drug development, we think about a need, unmet need, patients potentially, and putting a drug through a set of trials and processes to get it approved, and potentially when we think from a digital perspective, like you said, there may be an existing portfolio where you have an add-on, and therefore you're developing something to meet an unmet need there. But then at the same time, there's a whole other ecosystem where people are finding unmet needs that don't require therapeutic intervention, but a digital element such as monitoring or management of certain elements could then bring benefit to a patient, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, just to add on to that and complement it, that the traditional product development is a very linear process.
Yes.
If you look at drug development, it starts with research, then there is development, and there is release into the market. Whereas with the digital product, you have a constant iterative development process, which is based on a constant user feedback.
Yeah.
And hence, there is, and that also sort of leads us to a challenge in adopting digital development process in established healthcare organizations like pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies, because this kind of an iterative feedback loop based development process is a complete tangent to a linear process with which they're familiar and comfortable with.
Okay.
And that outlines one of the bigger challenges in digital transformation in these companies, which is an organizational change that allows such an iterative feedback loop to be part of your development process.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose it's kind of, a new paradigm when you think about having this as part of the development phase of either something going to market, or potentially maybe an easier route would be to have it on market already, a drug, and then you're supplementing it with a continuously improved product. Many people that are watching this are going to be sitting in a insights role, in a strategic brand position within pharmaceutical company. Clearly there is a need from what we talk about and common sense, that digital elements to integrate into the caregiving world, right? But what benefits are there that come as a pharmaceutical provider, life sciences pharma company, from having a digital element within the portfolio, right? I suppose one of the easiest things is you are supporting the patients in receiving potential products that you as a company may be developing or providing in the market, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is definitely one of the advantages, where you can create digital support programs, and that are essentially a patient support programs, but digital in their format, and are disseminated alongside your portfolio of drugs. For pharmaceutical companies, actually, digital innovations have I mean, there are lots of different buckets under which they can be value addition to a pharmaceutical company. So you can also these days have it in the pre market phase of drug development. So you have digital applications which significantly shorten your clinical trial time. They significantly help
Right.
they help you conduct virtual clinical trials, maybe from both from starting from patient recruitment and helping in targeted patient recruitment to clinical trial management, which could be done online and remotely.
Yeah.
That is one part of a segment and bucket under which the digital applications can be value addition to pharmaceutical companies. Actually, one of the examples that I would quote here, which is very interesting, and I think one of the golden examples that I've come across is the drug Ibrance. If you're aware of it, it's a breast cancer dedicated drug, and this I think 2 years back, FDA increased. So this drug was running at the end of its patency period,
Yeah.
and using real world evidence, Pfizer was able to extend its uh, the therapeutic disease spectrum to also include breast cancer patients in males. And that allowed them to, without the need of a clinical trial and using only real world evidence, they
Yeah.
were able to expand this portfolio for that particular drug and increase their revenues and allowed for a longer patency period. So I think there is a significant opportunity that lies in utilizing the real world evidence, shortening the clinical trial space, if the regulatory and the quality requirements are met, which is the biggest challenge in these cases, because the kind of data that you get from real world evidence is in most cases not aggregatable. It's difficult to make it coherent because it is so badly structured and fragmented, and the use cases have not been defined before.
Yeah.
Would help in ultimate data analysis and assimilation.
Yeah, and I suppose, when you look at drug development and the requirements now for being approved and being used, right? Approval is one thing, being used is or recommended in guidelines and reimbursed by national health bodies. There's a growing amount of real world evidence required, patient reported outcomes, and I suppose this is again an area where software as a medical device can help, because it's, I suppose, a regulated and recognized add-on if you're monitoring patients through something that's been very well defined and approved in its own right, to then build that evidence package. Is that a fair thing to say?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, that's a very good point that you touched upon there, Harshal, that the patient reported outcomes, the collecting these digital patient reported outcomes is a huge benefit for us to show how much the treatment outcome was essentially not reported before. Before being able to collect this on a real time basis, the patients had to come to the clinical offices and sign and fill in these paper forms. But now, because of the digital medium,
Yeah.
they're able to do this from the comfort of their home, and that itself allows you for a more accurate collection of these outcomes, more timely collection of these outcomes, and much easier in terms of the amount of work required from both patient and the nurse or the specialist nurse or the care team member who's collecting it.
Yeah. So you've convinced me. Okay, so software medical device, I mean, seems like something that you should be into, regardless of whether you're developing or have existing products in this space. You said, it can help have a more efficient development timeline if you integrate this, well thought out integration of software in that clinical development program. We've said that ultimately it helps patients potentially receive or manage their condition better and receive the medication that supports their condition. And again, from the pharma side and from the owner side, you've got this insight generation post, in the real world setting. And that can definitely help. You're sitting in a pharmaceutical company right now, and many listeners are the same. What are the challenges of integrating or building up this kind of digital capability? I think you touched on the iterative part and the way that the workflow or process is not quite the same. And I suppose I want to stay away from regulation as such because it's such a big world, but clearly regulation is another thing. In terms of mindset and the existing structure of brands, teams, franchises, have you seen any challenges in integrating a digital mindset or structure within a firm?
So I think from my experience, I would say that it requires a significant organizational transformation for successful adoption of digital development and design processes, because they're fundamentally different from what they're used to. The linear process of drug development is a completely different process versus the iterative, circular, feedback-based development of a digital application. And because there is such a fundamental difference, the processes that exist today in a pharma company are not, they need significant shift to be able to create those iterative processes in a much less challenging or in a much more smoother fashion. That's, I think, in my head, one of the biggest challenges. What I have seen particularly that has helped, and this is also basis conversations with other folks who are working in the pharma space and have a similar sort of roles and responsibilities as me, is that creating semi-independent, semi-autonomous digital units with expertise of different pharmaceutical functions, but still having a certain authority and a remit to be able to securely and safely build processes. So that that becomes your core satellite unit, which is building digital processes that is still answerable to the compliance setup of a linear process, but can actually translate that so that that compliance is met as well.
What are the hot topics right now in this space? I suppose one of the things, if you're getting into digital therapeutic software in a company, maybe looking at other companies, and is it partnerships that people are making? Is it about the portfolio plays? What are the hot topics when you think from a strategic sense in this space?
So my thoughts there would be more towards the partnership side of things. The flexibility and the suite of functionalities that you gain through partnerships is the fastest and the quickest way of building digital applications to your advantage when you're in a pharmaceutical company. And that allows you to leverage best of both the worlds, where the pharmaceutical companies' existing distribution marketing networks can be leveraged. At the same time, you can actually leverage the independence and the agile methodology of the smaller partners outside of the pharma world. So I think, as a concluding thought, I think those partnerships would be they are the ace that we have.
Brilliant, Neha. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights. Clearly, the time that we have has only scratched the surface of the topic, and I suppose regulatory developments is one thing, as well as I suppose this partnership thing that we're talking about right now and how that has an interplay. And I suppose that's another topic for another time.
Absolutely. I think this is a conversation that can go on, and I've been told by my friends that I should not talk about it as much because I do not stop talking. But then this requires much more time.
Well, we like listening to people that have opinions and insights, and once again from us and everyone watching, thank you for your time, and hopefully we can have you back in the future and discuss some of the other topics.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
This video is one of many Insight series videos from us at INOVIS. Our website and YouTube channel have all our episodes available on demand. Also, if you're a pharmaceutical leader in the competitive strategy space, why not drop us a line and potentially join us in the hot seat for another one. But for now, thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on another episode sometime soon.